Hi friends, host Eric here, talking with famous people, and I'm driving to see my parents today, and I am thinking about evolution. What occurs to me is that not only is evolution bullshit, but more importantly, it's impossible. It doesn't make, it doesn't just not make sense. It's contrary to what we do know. So, we know this. We know how an individual reproduces. An individual reproduces by finding another individual of the same DNA blueprint and mates with that person to make another creature with the same DNA blueprint. Now, individual expressions of this DNA blueprint vary. So, I can be tall or short, I can be fat or thin, I can be hairy or bald, I can be whatever. The expression of the blueprint is something that's adaptive to some extent. So, not only is the individual expression of the blueprint genetically different than any other expression of the blueprint, because there's like 3 frame levels here. The first frame level is core blueprint, what you'd call your sequence of chromosomes, I guess you'd say. The second level is alleles. That is the specific dominant and recessive genes that comprise your unique self. And the third level is epigenetic. Environmental shit that happens that causes your expression of your chromosomal blueprint to it makes the allele aspect of things malleable. Okay, so a good analogy, perhaps, what I'm saying is the object class mechanics of the thing disallow that. So think of chromosomal signature as the template, or no, not as the template. Think of chromosomal signature as the app. Now, think of alleles, the dominant recessive signature of a person, as being a template in the app. So think of the app as being like a word processing app or something. And then think about the epigenetic stuff as changes to the template that you can make. The problem with the idea of evolution is it says, because you can make changes to the template, and because templates sometimes end up looking wildly different than they started out with, we can change the app by working with templates in this fashion. But we can't, of course, because the only way you could do that is going to be harmful. So it's like the mutation aspect of things represents, say, a template that has some sort of genetic disease causing the person to get sick or die or become reproductively non-viable or something like that. So, are they coming to get me? I hope not. No. Okay, mutations are almost always deleterious, occasionally neutral or nearly neutral. Just as if somebody puts a bad code into a template that they've uploaded and you've downloaded and used in your app, it's designed to fit with your app, but it ends up fucking it up. So you can fuck up the app, you can't really make it better by the templates. If you want to make it better, you have to get an update to it. You know, you have to download the official next version of the app. The thing is, note that the next version of the app is not downloaded by templating your way up to that spot where it manifests, right? That would involve some external thing or whatever. Now, I'm not saying this is a reason to believe in God or simulation or any of the alternatives it would seem to possibly imply. I'm saying this is a good reason to negate evolution. The whole concept of speciation via adaptation and selection over time is completely garbage. Think about the mechanisms of it. You've got an individual that reproduces by copying its chromosomal signature, so that even if I decimate a population out of 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, there's still representations of that same chromosomal signature, and the children they have will either have that chromosomal signature or they will not. It's a binary thing. Nobody has children of a different species. And additionally, to the extent that you have a child born with a different chromosomal signature, they're severely genetically deformed in some way, and they aren't going to survive. So it simply is the case that the templates are heritable, and to a certain extent, even the changes to the templates can be heritable. That's epigenetics. But in no sense can you change the app. And that's what evolution is trying to claim. That because templates show adaptive features, that they became that that's how the app came to be. But it doesn't make any sense. Obviously, the template has to exist before any adaptation to it can occur. So, if I tell you, for example, populate a world with self-replicating designs. So triangles make new triangles, squares make new squares, circles make new circles. But I want to fill the world, and the purpose of these things is to go through holes the same shape as they are. But I'm going to fill the world with lots of things that are not quite exactly triangles, and not quite exactly circles, and not quite exactly squares. So, sometimes a triangle, and you've got different colors of triangles, okay? So, let's say, if there's a square on blue land, then the blue square will go right through it, and we'll get a reward of some kind. You know, that'll make it feel satisfied. And if 2 blue squares go through a square hole in a blue land, then lo and behold, they make another blue square. But because not all of the squares are really square shaped, some of them are kind of squiggly on the side or whatever, we need to build in to the system a way for the squares and circles and triangles to adapt to a changing environment that produces shit tons of imperfect holes for the various shapes extant. Extant? Is that the word? Meaning existent or extant? I don't remember. Anyway, so you say, well, okay, when the 2 squares, foremost, let all blue squares be of varying size and thickness. So, like, Some of the squares are bigger, some of the squares are smaller, some of the squares have wide lines on the side of them, and some of the squares have thinner lines, whatever. Some of them way more, some of them way less. Within a certain range, let all blue squares within a certain range express this diversity. That is to say, have each individual have two levels of expression. One, binary, is it a blue square or not? Two, sliding scale, or relative difference in similarity. So in that world, then you can see that the sliding scale can never change the binary for a very good reason. It's a different class of object. But if you just think again about the math of the thing, it's like, at what point do individuals of a species stop producing babies of the same species? We know that even when you artificially and explicitly apply selection to produce breeds of something, that it doesn't cause them ever to stop to actually speciate by the traditional definition of the word species. Now, note that there's some controversy over the definition of the word species in the contemporary evolutionary biology community. And that's a trouble spot, because they'd like to leave the word undefined, but evolution purports to explain, if nothing else, the origin of the species. To the extent that it refuses to define what that is, then how can it explain? I guess it would say, well, we just explained the diversity of biogenetics on the planet. But that's not... Look, the thing is, I know that there's a branching tree in the fossil record that would strongly suggest evolution. Because if in fact it goes from multiple species back down to singular species, like from 24 species to 23, 22, 20, over and you see different species branching out from a similar ancestor, it would in fact appear that they evolved in some capacity. Like, there's no satisfactory explanation in the idea that the new species just popped out one day of the old species. Half the women fish started giving birth to sunfish instead of catfish, or something like that. That's not a very satisfying explanation at all. It's quite an unsatisfying answer. So then, what other explanation do we have? Well, obviously they became isolated from each other and adapted over time. Except, at what point did they stop reproducing by spitting out copies of their chromosomal signature? At no point did they stop doing that, as they don't now. And adaptations produce breeds, but don't produce new species. So, but if you just think about how things, at least for sexually reproducing organisms, how is it that a change in chromosomes occurs, right? Like, when does the humans start popping out a new species called post-human that has one more chromosome or something? When does that happen? And how? There's no explanation. There's absolutely no explanation for this in evolution. None. When I put in my house, I'm like, how long is it going to take to get to my parents? I have time to stop by there before work. said 20 minutes. And then there's all this fucking traffic. What the fuck's up with that? It's gonna take me more than 20 minutes to get here, I tell you that. And then I gotta like turn right around and go to work. Fucking goddamn it. Is that the problem? Everyone's pausing to look at that shit? You fucks. Accident on the other side of the freeway. So, the thing is, of course, if you talk to anybody about evolution, they'll tell you this. They'll be like, listen, it just takes a really long time. Humans came to be over the course of 4 billion years of evolution. Except that's not true. There have been multiple extinction events that have taken the Earth back down to very low-level life, like single cell organisms, or maybe multi-cell, but still like bacterial and shit, or even just a few fish or something. Let's say you had a bunch of fish still left over, but no land mammals. Like, what allowed mammals to take hold in the world according to evolution? What was the extinction of the dinosaurs? Except that was just 66 million years ago. That wasn't 4 billion years ago. So how do you explain that? Remember, 1 million years is not a very long time. 1,000 years ago, it was like the Middle Ages, the year 1000. Humans were still humans, and there's no reason to think that the species has changed really at all in that 1,000 years. The individuals' expressions of the species have become healthier, longer lived, smarter for a lot of reasons. There's a metaphysical evolution certainly that occurs over time. Ideas do evolve, unlike species. So, as an idea-bearing organism, the evolution of ideas has allowed humans to become ever more effective at willfully interacting with their environment. So, the point is, it's impossible. Evolution is impossible because it violates the fundamental mechanism by which all creatures reproduce. That is to say, making copies of themselves, making copies of their chromosomal DNA signature. Ducks make more ducks. That's how they reproduce. In order to imagine a world in which you have a new species of duck emerging from an old species of duck, you have to have an isolated population of 2 mutants who aren't ducks anymore. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. Because how does every species reproduce itself? It makes copies of itself. It makes new instances of that species. Some of which may in fact be more or less well adapted to the environment. Okay, so it's true. Of my 4 babies, if I'm a possum or something, one of them is stronger and fitter maybe, and survives better. And that's simply a way of keeping the genome of a species fit. It says, if individuals of the species start liking it for children to be taller and they start killing off the shorter ones, then the species will become taller in general. In other words, it's not even a mechanism. It's just there's only tall ones left, and it won't prevent shorter or taller versions of that one from occurring periodically. It's not going to be an exact norm, but by selecting for certain aspects of a genetic range, we can demonstrate that it's not possible to speciate in that fashion, because that's an expression of the species adapting to selective pressures, and it has to be a thing adapting to these selective pressures. Now, of course, species don't actually adapt. What's actually happening is individuals adapt, and that may express as a species level selective force vector. So it's like the moths that all turned black over time when the British Industrial Revolution made all these trees that had formerly been white, made them all black with soot. And these moths that had used to live there that were formerly white all turned black. Now, you might say that they're a different species. That this is like, well, see, there you go, Eric. There's an example of speciation right there. There are no more white moths. There are only black moths. Except when the soot stopped, they went back to being white moths. And genetically, where their chromosomal signature didn't change, it was just that for that stretch of time, the whiter ones were all killed, I guess. I mean, I don't even know. It's like, okay, well, so now everything's black. They're able to still survive. Why were they white in the first place? Well, it protected them against predators, presumably. They blended in with the white trees. It made them harder to see. Birds had a hard time eating them. Okay, so why didn't they all get eaten then when the trees all of a sudden turned black? And how did they manage to adapt so quickly? Is it just selective pressures? Like, because within a couple of years, all the moths were black. Well, the answer is it probably doesn't have to do with predation and selection and stuff. It probably is some mechanism we just don't understand. Because if it had to do with predation and reproductive selection and pressures stemming from that, then I mean, look, you have a whole population of white moths. Over the course of just maybe a couple of weeks, when they start the plant up, all the trees turn black. They've still got a population of all white moths. Okay, so the birds eat them. The birds feast. They can catch these moths really easy now. Now, amongst this population of white moths, there are some that are slightly darker. But why is that the decisive factor? Given the fact that they still stand out against the black trees, wouldn't a much more decisive factor be something like speed and agility or randomness of flight, which is something that a lot of flying insects have to protect them against predatory birds, is randomness of flight pattern. So let's assume that amongst that population of white moths, some of the slightly darker moths were also kind of slow and fat. Well, their slightly darkness didn't increase their camouflage ability at all because, again, white against black is as uncamouflaged as you can get, even if you're kind of off-white. So, I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. It's as though there's a species that knows it's a species and is concerned about the well-being of the species, even though that can't possibly be the case. Species is just a set name for individuals sharing a chromosomal signature. That's probably the best definition of it. The idea that something's a different species if it cannot reproduce, if it cannot mate and produce reproductively viable offspring, well, that's a great definition because at least we can falsify it, we can test it. And if we're gonna use this falsification test on evolution, we falsify it. In no uncertain terms, chihuahuas can still produce reproductively viable offspring with wolves. That's how not speciated they are from wolves. So, it turns out that even though that, go back to the triangle, circle, square thing, turns out that yellow triangle is actually a really deformed looking yellow circle. And that orange square is also a really deformed looking orange circle. So, or yellow circle. So, those two things can mate and produce another yellow circle. I know it doesn't look like a circle anymore, but it's still a circle because that's what it is. Why can't it change from being a circle? Because there are only it's part of a class of objects. And objects in that class have a designation. If it is true or false, it's binary for the status of yellow circle. Variation within the yellow circle, within a set yellow circle, can be very wide. But Chihuahuas and wolves are still both yellow circles. So it's a good test, right? If in fact things are a different species, you can't mate them. So, for example, Lonely George, the last Galapagos tortoise or turtle, they tried to mate him with multiple similar species. He could produce reproductively viable offspring with none of them. Because unlike in the simplified example where there are just circles, squares, and triangles, in the world there are shit tons of different species. There's Galapagos turtle, there's Mantigrade turtle, and they look kind of similar, but they're actually different shapes. It's like triangle and square. Or maybe they're different colors. So it's like Lonely George and this female turtle that he was mated with, he would fuck her, you know. He was like, well, you're not really my species exactly, but I'll fuck you. Anyway, he probably didn't care that he couldn't reproduce with his own species. He was just like, right, I can fuck all these other turtles, it's fine. That's the long and the short of this video. Or that's the long and the long of it. I need to get gas. I didn't even think to check my gas before I left the house. Bye.